Today we're taking a look at the top 10 original Dungeons & Dragons monsters. Please stick around. I'm AZ Mountaineer. This is our channel, Old School Rules, where we celebrate the community of old school gamers and grognards who like classic RPGs, miniatures, magazines, and everything that goes with it. Our top 10 videos are just an opportunity to celebrate something we like about the hobby. And today we're taking a look at the original monsters created for the game of Dungeons & Dragons. Hope you enjoy the video. I've been thinking about this video for a while now, so I'm really excited to do it today. I've got all my original D&D books. I've got my D&D Monster Manual. We've even got a copy of Chainmail here. We're going to talk about a Moldvay and the Holmes Basic box set as well. The topic today are the original monsters. In other words, not those monsters that were taken from legend or fiction or mythology, but those that were actually created unique new monsters by the people who played the game in the earliest days. So let's get into it here. Anything that was made up in OD&D, Holmes, Moldvay, or the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons system, so 74 to 79 time frame. There's more that come later, but these are the only ones I'm going to look at today. And so we're going to look at each of the books. We'll talk about the monsters. We'll talk a little bit about where they first show up, how they described or changed their descriptions over time. So the first thing I want to cover are just a few. There's obviously a lot more than 10. So here's a few honorable mentions that I thought about, didn't quite make the cut. The first one here, and I'll get myself out of the way, the first one here is the Zorn. And the Zorn, as far as I can tell, has its first appearance actually in the AD&D Monster Manual. So it's sort of a late addition to the game. This is 7+7 hit dice monster, and it says the Zorn are a race of creatures found on the elemental plane of Earth, but on rare occasions they will abide on the material plane for a time. When so doing, they seek deep subterranean places. They feed on certain rare minerals, which are the subject of their quest on the material plane. So one of the things I really like about them is just their appearance, right? They're just super cool. They've got like the 3 arms coming out of a weird part of their body, their mouth up on top, and their crazy eyes. And a couple of cool pictures here that show up in other places. The one on top is Jim Holloway. I'm not positive who did the one that was there on the bottom. But so the Zorn, just really unique. Nothing, as far as I can tell, ever came from anywhere in mythology. The next one on our honorable mention list, and probably really in some respects you could argue should be in the top 10. This is the Purple Worm. So the Purple Worm, I think, is a creation of Dave Arneson. It is there from the very beginning. It's in the original wood grain box set in the Monsters book. Let me show you. I'll share with you a little bit about this because it does change over time. So in the original description from the white box, I think I have, these huge creatures lurk beneath the surface. They reach a length of 50 feet, 10 feet around, poisonous stinging tail, and if they get exceed what they need to hit by more than 4 or more, let's see, no, over 4, they swallow you whole. So that's pretty scary stuff. They show up again in the Holmes box set, in the Holmes rule book, and they're again same size. And here they only have to get 2 more than what they needed to hit you, and they will swallow you. They're not in the Moldvay set, but they do show up in the basic. But they show up in the expert set. I guess they were probably seen as being too hard a monster to be in the basic. Now they're over 100 feet long and 8 to 10 feet in diameter. And now they're back to 4 or more over what they needed to hit, and always on a 20, then they will swallow you. And of course they have a stinging tail. And they're still there in the Monster Manual as well. Now they can sense vibrations 60 feet or more, so that's what would probably draw them to the party. 8 to 10 feet in diameter and 40 to 50 feet long. So now they're a little bit smaller, and they give some different sizes. If you want to roll to see how old the worm is, it could be even smaller still. And now, again, they attack with a bite, and if they get 4 or more over, then they, or hit a 20, then they automatically swallow whoever it was they were attacking. and obviously begin to digest you, and they still have this the stinger on the tail. So again, the purple worm, super cool. I think it's been there from the beginning, and it's definitely one of those classic AD or classic Dungeons and Dragons monsters. The next is a bit of a combo, and I get myself out of the way here. And this is, we've got the black pudding, the green slime, the ochre jelly, and the gray ooze, all sort of combined here into one. So these actually show up in the original wood grain or white box monster list. And one of the things I like, well, first off, I think they're great classic monsters. And yeah, there was a blob in the movies and so forth, but I really feel like the characteristics here are unique. And the thing I also like about these are the differences between them keeps, unless you really study the rules, you can get confused about how to go about attacking these different things, right? So here's your test to ask yourself for the ochre jelly, black pudding, green slime, and gray ooze, right? What weapons would you try to use, and what would you remember not to use when you attack them, right? So we'll start with the ochre jelly. So it is a giant amoeba. Obviously, he calls it in the original the cleanup crew for the dungeon. And so the ochre jelly can be killed by, damaged by, fire and cold. Weapons and lightning bolts do what? They split them in half and make them into multiple ones, and now you're going to have different ones attacking you. So next up is the black, the black pudding. And so what are you going to use here as your attack? They are only affected by fire, not damaged by cold, and then weapons or lightning bolts will cause them to split into multiple pieces, but then they just continue unharmed. Next, this is my favorite, almost made the list, is the green slime. You may know the difference with the green slime is it does not move. It's just sort of on the walls, and the way it works, right, is it falls down on top of you, or maybe you step into it if it's on the floor or on the wall and you touch it, right? But basically falling down on top of the party is the normal way they're going to try and attack. So what can you use to damage green slime? Fire and cold. Lightning bolts and weapons just don't do anything to it. And of course, the really particularly scary thing about the green slime, they all eat through your armor and eat into your flesh and do damage, right? But it can't be scraped off. And so when it gets to your skin, if it gets on anything else, you have to rip it off and throw it away. If it gets to your skin, it will penetrate your flesh, and in one turn, you're going to turn into green slime yourself. And so if you can't get a cure disease spell to kill it, you're in bad shape if this stuff lands on you. And finally, gray ooze. Now, how do you attack the gray ooze? Looks like other stuff, hard to detect. Does not get chopped into multiple pieces by weapons. Only can be damaged by lightning bolts or chopping or piercing weapon. No damage taken from cold or fire. So, you use the cold and fire on for example, ochre jelly. You can use only the fire on the black pudding. You can't use any fire or cold on the gray ooze. So, anyway, I thought that was an interesting thing about these, how you have to use all the different types of things in order to remember how to damage them. And they show up in the Holmes Basic and the other rules all the way up through the D&D Monster Manual. So the next two that we have, I think of them as being very similar. We have the Lurker Above and the Trapper. The Lurker Above actually shows up in none of the original books, but in the Strategic Review. I think the Lurker Above shows up in the Strategic Review number 3, and the Trapper shows up in Strategic Review number 5. And then I don't think these make an appearance in Holmes, Moldvay, or Cook, and then they show up again in the 1979 in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual. So even though they're a little bit different, I think for me both of these are very similar, right? The Lurker Above sort of floats along in the top of a cavern and falls down on top of you and constricts you, and then the Trapper is usually the floor, could be a wall, but either way, it wraps up around you. Both of them do constriction. as their basic, the real risk or the challenge to the party is someone ends up inside of there. They get wrapped up. I think you get two to 5 rounds for the lurker above, and just 6 rounds for the trapper. But basically, even though you're taking some damage, the constriction basically is what's going to kill you if your party can't get you out. And if you're inside, you can't attack. So you're basically hoping your party is able to do enough damage to kill this thing before you suffocate to death. So pretty classic monster. And again, I think a unique, as far as I know, unique creation here to Dungeons and Dragons. So now we're going to move on to the 10 best original monsters in Dungeons and Dragons. Number 10, this is the Carn Crawler. And the Carn Crawler shows up in Greyhawk. There we go. In Greyhawk, the first supplement to the original wood grain or white box game. And several of these are sort of creatures that sort of just naturally hang out in the dungeon. This is another, you could say, part of the cleanup crew, as he called those things. The Carn Crawler says these scavengers attack in order to ensure they will continue to be supplied of corpses to scavenge. Worm-shaped, about 9 feet long, 3 feet high, with all these tentacles on the front end. And that's the really cool thing about them. If they hit you with those tentacles, you have to save versus paralyzation. And then, of course, you're out of the fight. And so they'll sort of paralyze you. They can go across the walls and the floors. And so there's chances they can drop down and gain surprise as well. And this monster shows up again in Holmes Basic, Moldvay Basic, and the AD&D Monster Manual. Basically in the same, all the same general characteristics. Now let's take a look. Number 9. This creature, as I understand it from the video I've seen Tim Kask talking about it, was created by Tim. This is one of those monsters where they had those little plastic rubber toys, and they had this one, and Gary's like, well, we don't have any, this one hasn't been used yet. Why don't you make something up? And so it's called the Boule. And you can see the picture here from the monster manual, and then from this is what's on the what I call the copyright page here in the monster manual. So a really cool creature. So the description in the monster manual says the Boule, or the land shark, is the result of a mad wizard's experiment, the crossbreeding of a snapping turtle and an armadillo, with infusions of demon's ichor. And they basically feed on horses, men, and if I remember correctly, they're usually underground. And the gaming group got to this thing where they were taking all these horses or mules into the dungeon with them, and so they could bring out tons and tons of goods from the dungeon, and obviously that's how you gained experience points. And my understanding, I think, if I'm remembering the story that Tim Kask tells, is they were a lot of these were created in reaction to what was going on in the game, and so these guys would come in and eat their horses or mules or whatever, keeping them from carrying out a pharaoh's treasure trove with them every time they went into the dungeon. Just a crazy creature. So the Ember Hulk is one of the then there's several monsters that shows up in the Greyhawk supplement, and then oddly, the drawing that's here by Dave Sutherland shows up in this book. There's absolutely no text discussing the Ember Hulk in that book, but you get this piece of artwork, which is fantastic, inserted into there. I guess maybe just they had the drawing, and for whatever reason, didn't make it in, there weren't space here, or they had too much space in the other book, and so they give you a visual, which makes some sense because this is a creature. It was really hard to visualize just from the description. So they describe the Ember Hulk, interestingly, somewhat similar to a human. I guess it has legs and arms. Can be mistaken for something less deadly than it is when it normally appears in the dark, 8 feet tall, 5 feet wide. The head resembles a bushel basket with a gaping maw flanked by pairs of exceedingly sharp mandibles. runs around on the two legs. If you see it, if you look squarely at all four eyes, it can cause confusion. That's sort of one of its classic characteristics. Its claws are harder than iron, do great damage, and are used as weapons, and also what they use to burrow through rock, which is always a great way to use the Ember Hulk. Right in your adventure, you're going down a passageway or whatever, and then from the boot, it comes flying out of the wall, sort of like he's doing here in Sutherland's drawing. Now, a couple other nice pieces of art. You got a Jeff D. Piece of art up here, and then you've got an Errol Otis drawing down here at the bottom. Both pretty cool. And one of the things I think is interesting about the Ember Hulk is it's in Greyhawk, and then it just sort of disappears. It's not in Holmes. I don't see it in Moldvay or the Cook Expert set. And then it makes a comeback when we get to AD&D and we have the AD&D Monster Manual. Okay, number 7 on our list, one of my all-time favorites. So good, I excluded him from the sort of cleanup crew. This is the Gelatinous Cube. Sort of famously or infamously, there's no drawing of it, even up through the AD&D Monster Manual in 1977, because it's basically just a gelatinous cube that is more or less transparent. So the Gelatinous Cube shows up for the first time in Greyhawk, along with a number of the original creations were in this book. It's in all the books from them. It's in Holmes, Moldvay, and the AD&D Monster Manual. Some slight changes as we go along. Basically a cube, generally 10 feet on a side, sweeping through the dungeons. Part of the cleanup crew absorbs bodies and equipment, and anything else that comes across gets sort of sucked up into this cube. So famously, it will digest the body of a creature or a human, and the skeletons, and then their pieces of armor, weapons, rings, potions, whatever, may end up inside of there, which is why you're always interested in killing a gelatinous cube, because you never know what kind of treasure it may have picked up along the way. The downside is if you get touched by a gelatinous cube, you have to make a save versus paralyzation, and you take 2d4 and 2d8 points of damage. And how do you attack these things back? Well, they're affected by take damage from normal weapons as well as fire. And then originally, other spells didn't have any effect on it. And that's the same rule in the Holmes basic set. They don't really make any other changes to that. In Moldvay, they say that if you cast Cure Light Wounds on someone, it will unparalyze them. Otherwise, they now tell you that that'll last for 2 to 8 turns. Then in the Monster Manual, they tell you that it lasts for the paralysis lasts for 5 to 20 rounds, but no mention is made that Cure Light Wounds has the effect of unparalyzing you. That's an interesting rule that shows up there in Moldvay, and people are always asking, well, how long am I paralyzed by this touch? Same thing for ghouls and other things that paralyze you. Here, at least, you do have an answer to the question. In the AD&D Monster Manual, they also make a change that a cold spell, which up to this point had no effect, will, if they fail a saving throw, will slow the movement rate of the gelatinous cube and lessen the amount of damage that their gooey touch would do to you. A fantastic monster. Get out of the way here so you can see this art. I think all of this art maybe is by Jim Holloway. Certainly the one on the left is. Okay, number 6. So ropers are one of my favorite monsters. I just think they're really, really cool. The roper actually has its origin in the Strategic Review, number 2 from 1975. And there's a small article in there that talks about it. And then it shows up, the picture here behind me, and I'll get out of the way. That picture shows up in Blackmoor. That shows up in Blackmoor here next to a mind flayer. And actually in the back he mentions it being in Greyhawk, but it does not show up in this book. I triple checked because I saw that reference and I was confused by it. So the original drawing there is by Tracy Lesh, I think I'm saying that right, who had a few drawings in the early books. And then we've got, it's got to be a Sutherland drawing that comes from the AD&D Monster Manual, and then Errol Otis has this great picture that comes from a book, I can't remember off the top of my head if that's from the Rogues Gallery or a different book that he had some illustrations in. So the Ropers are really cool basic monster, right? It says a mass of foul, festering corruption, a cigar-shaped 9-foot-long creature. It stands upright, looking like a pillar or stalagmite, or can flatten itself on the floor so as to look like more of a lump, and has strands of strong, sticky rope-like extensions that shoot out 2 to 5 feet from the body. The hit will cause weakness, 50% loss of your strength in 1 to 3 turns, and to draw the prey into the toothy maw, where it will be quickly devoured. And this thing just looks like it's going nam, 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 eating something. The chance to break a strand is the same as for opening doors, but for every turn, the roper drags the victim 10 feet closer. Seems like pretty slow, but maybe he has to pull, like muscle. Maybe you have to pull that back into the body. A yellowish gray beast, unaffected by lightning, half damage from, at most from cold if he fails his saving throw, but particularly susceptible to fire, -4 on his saving throw. And an interesting thing about the roper, so it's in the strategic review, and then it's the drawing shows up in the Blackmoor supplement, but then the roper, it sort of disappears, is not in Holmes, is not in Mold Bay Cook until we get to the AD&D Monster Manual in 1977, and it reemerges, and I think it's just one of the classic all-time monsters. Number 5, the owlbear, and again, classic monster, lots of great drawings here. Taking a look at those, we've got Sutherland from the Monster Manual going clockwise, an Errol Otis drawing again from one of the supplements. This owlbear down here at the bottom is by Greg Bell. That drawing shows up here in the back of Greyhawk, and it's really, and that's the description, initially, right? It's a bear's body with the head of an owl, and then like talons, more talons than maybe a bear's claws would normally be. And so that's, Greg Bell got the drawing right. It's one of those creatures that really has changed over time, and even up through 5th edition, people keep redrawing what this creature looks like. It's one of the ones that came from those little rubber plastic toys, and the David Sutherland drawing from the AD&D Monster Manual is spot on what that little rubber creature looks like. As is, I think, a really faithful interpretation done by Rosloff here that's on the interior cover of B2 Keep on the Borderlands. But in fairness, Greg Bell's actually tracks the description of it. So creatures of a horrid visage and disposition, they attack whatever they see and fight to the death. They love to deliver the hug like a bear would, and they also would do damage with their beak, tooth, and claw. 8 feet tall, 1,500 pounds, with a furry body that tends to look a little bit like feathers near the head, and thick skin. In Holmes Basic, they have a really simple description. It just says, Armor Class 5, 3 attacks, 1 to 8 each. These are huge bears with the heads of an owl. Males 8 feet tall, 2 foot long claws, and an ugly disposition. They will try to bear hug, but they don't really get into what exactly the bear hug's going to do to you. They show up again in Moldvay. Huge bear-like creature with the head of an owl. And again, this is a little bit more like the original description from Greyhawk about their nasty temper and their desire to give you a hug. And here they tell you the hug gives you an extra 2d8 in damage per round. So it's a particularly deadly or damaging attack. And then in the AD&D Monster Manual, where they have Sutherland's drawing, they say the horrible owlbear is probably the result of genetic experimentation by some insane wizard. They inhabit the tangled forest regions of temperate climes as well as subterranean labyrinths. Ravenous eaters, aggressive hunters, and evil-tempered at all times. They attack on sight and fight to the death. And here again, they describe the fight. And here, if you get pulled in 2d8 points of damage from the hug, that round and every round thereafter until they've crushed you to death. So, pretty darn tough, pretty classic creature. The owlbear has stuck around through all the editions and remains, I think, one of the favorite monsters to this day. Number 4, you can't have Dungeons and Dragons adventures in my book without the rust monster. So again, this is a creature that looked like one of those little plastic rubber figures that they had, and they decided, what are we going to make this thing do? And they came up with the rust monster, right? So it shows up in Greyhawk initially in the original sort of collection of invented monsters. So the description changes a little bit, so that's worth looking at. These seemingly inoffensive creatures are the bane of metal with a ferrous content, for as their name implies, they have the effect of rust on such substances, and this happens nearly instantaneously. Any hit by the rust monster on you or by you upon the rust monster will cause here it says, even magic weapons will rust and fall to flakes. Armor is affected in a like manner. It's fast, attracted to the smell, and once it rusts your stuff, then it likes to eat the rust. Okay, then it shows up in the Holmes Basic set, and basically tracks the same description without really any updates. Then it shows up in Moldvay, where it's revised a little bit, and it describes him for the first time if you didn't have the figurine, right? A rust monster has a body like a giant armadillo with a long tail and 2 long front feelers, antennae. And again, if you hit or get hit, it causes the metal and weapons to instantly rust and become unusable and worthless on one hit. Here we have a change. Magical weapons and armor struck lose 1+. They don't give you a saving throw. DMs can think about that, but anyway. That's what makes the rust monster so fearsome, right? Is that he destroys your stuff, especially if you're a fighter. And my understanding is that's exactly why the rust monster was created. I think by Gary. Was these guys had all this fancy armor, fancy weapons. He's like, oh, you love all that stuff. You're killing all my, everything in my dungeon. Well, here's this little creature. What the heck is he? I hit him. Oh, with your magic sword, guess what? Destroyed. So here they say for each plus, they have a 10% chance not to rust. So that's in place of a saving throw, right? So your +3 shield or sword has a 30% chance to avoid. So Moldvay gives you a little bit of mercy. And then finally, we have the AD&D version where we have, for the first time, a drawing from Sutherland that shows you what that toy looks like. And they tell you that rust monsters inhabit dark subterranean places, but frankly, put them anywhere you want in your campaign. They're fantastic. They range in search of their food, metal of all sorts. And here they tell you that they can essentially smell metal from 9 inches, 90 feet away. And here again, they still give you the saving throw, but otherwise it's going to fall to pieces. And here they don't. It's not impact doesn't cause you to lose a plus. In the AD&D version, you have a chance not to basically rust. And so if you fail that percentage roll, then you become basically dust to be eaten. So, and man, even for the old timers who are really smart and clever fighters and all that kind of stuff, I find the rust monster to be a fantastic monster to roll out there. They know what it is, but they react like they're 10 years old every time they see one. It's just a lot of fun. Great drawings here. There's one, I think, from the DMG of this fighter jumping up into the wizard's arms because he didn't want to fight it, and then a couple, a Jim Holloway and a Jeff Easley drawing as well. Getting down to the top 3, the Mimic, a classic monster. The Mimic is one of the more recent creations. It shows up for the first time, as far as I can tell, in the Monster Manual in 1977. Mimics are described as subterranean creatures that cannot stand the light of the sun, able to mimic stone or wood. 2 varieties, the large, semi-intelligent, carnivorous killer mimic and the slightly smaller, more intelligent sort. The former attacks anything nearby, the latter generally friendly if offered food. I don't know how many friendly mimics you guys ever had in your dungeons. They always tend to be pretty aggressive and deadly in mine. They pose as stonework like a door, a chest, or the floor, etc. You touch it and then they attack. Just a classic. It ranks really high for me because it's just such a classic creature, and of course it's really evolved and become, I think, even more popular maybe as time has gone on and different editions have gone on. You know, got the Southern art there. It's in the Monster Manual, and then another drawing from one of the D&D products, and then a much more recent version. And everybody just loves the Mimic. It's gotten a lot more, violent with the teeth and the tongue, and it even makes an appearance, right, in the Dungeons & Dragons movie that was out, I think, last year or last couple of years. And I'll get out of the way here because I want to give a shout out to my friend Ron, who's running the Page, the Philadelphia area Gaming Expo. And Page is happening in January of 2025. It'll be the second year. There's a ton, like 30 plus special guests from the history of the hobby, everyone from the early era all the way up through modern personalities who are popular on YouTube or have gaming channels or other podcasts, Twitch channels, etc. So just a shout out, and the reason I'm talking about Page is because the mascot of the Philadelphia area Gaming Expo is Phil E. Cheesesteak, who looks an awful lot like a Mimic. Number 2 on the list, my personal favorite monster in Dungeons & Dragons is the Mind Flayer. I've always loved the Mind Flayer from the very, very beginning. So the Mind Flayer actually has its origins in Strategic Review. I believe that's in Strategic Review number 1. And then he also shows up in Blackmoor, there we go, with the drawing by Tracy Lesh, I think is the name, and then is described here in the Eldritch Wizardry book, where they talk about psionics and have a lot of creatures that have some psionic component. So here we will start with the description from the Strategic Review. Okay, so in the Strategic Review number 1 from 1975, we have the creature feature, the Mind Flayer. 8 hit dice monster. This is a super intelligent man-shaped creature with 4 tentacles by its mouth, which it uses to strike its prey. If a tentacle hits, it will penetrate to the brain, draw it forth, and the monster will devour it. It takes 1 to 4 turns for the tentacle to reach the brain, at which time the victim is dead. A Mind Flayer will flee if an encounter is going against it. The major weapon, however, is its Mind Blast, psionics. They call it here they haven't flushed that out, so they call it a psi force with a 6-inch directional range and a radius of 5. All within the radius must save as indicated or will suffer the result. And they describe the Mind Blast. There's a table, they look at your intelligence. That gives you a saving throw based on how far away you are. And then the effect is different based on your intelligence as well, because everything from death, coma, sleep, stun, confused, enraged, feeble mind, or permanent insanity. Seems like some of the things in the middle would be better outcomes, but that's what it says. Magic users get +1 on the saving throw, clerics get +2, and a Helm of Telepathy will give you a +4 on the saving throw. And when saves are made, the Mind Flayer then becomes stunned for 3 rounds. So then we have the supplement, which is shorter, but of course they've already, here in this book, right, they've discussed psionics, so you've got that. And they basically describe super intelligent man-shaped creatures of lawful evil. And now here they change it, right, and they say the head resembles a small octopus with 4 tentacles, because before all we knew was tentacles. Used to strike the prey, and the same thing goes in and gets after the brain eating. Although non-magical, they have 90% magic resistance, so that's added up. And now they talk about they have their psionics and their Mind Blast. And they describe that a little bit. No appearance by the Mind Flayer in Holmes Basic Mold Bay Cook Expert set. Here, just get out of the way so you can see some artwork. And then he shows up again in 1977 in the Monster Manual. Mind Flayers are found in subterranean places. They detest sunlight. They're greatly evil and consider the bulk of humanity as cattle to feed upon. So now we're starting to really flesh out the Mind Flayer we all sort of know and love, or fear and hate. And again, the physical attack is the striking with the tentacles. Reach in and get hold of your brain, 1 to 4 melee rounds, and draw it forth which kills you. So they can eat your brains. And then they have the Mind Blast sonic power, which of course now you've got to understand sonics and dig into that fun stuff. They have additional psionic abilities, levitation, domination, ESP, etc. And again, the propensity that if it starts to turn against them, they flee, always save themselves, no matter what they have to leave behind. They speak their own arcane language and several other weird tongues, purportedly those of races of things that dwell in regions of the subterranean world far deeper than mankind has ever ventured. It's rumored they have a city somewhere deep beneath the earth. And then a little bit more description. The Mind Flayer's skin glistens with slime, a nauseous mauve, its tentacles purplish black. His eyes are white with no pupil, and 3 long fingers on each hand are reddish, but the hands are mauve. So he's a little multicolored creature. So on the left, we've got the Sutherland piece from the AD&D, which is my favorite. And then we've got the Tracy Leach's original drawing from Eldritch Wizardry, and then a couple other drawings that show up here in different supplements. All right. Well, that's my favorite monster, but I think in fairness, it's probably not number 1 on the list, just in terms of its popularity and how much people think about different monsters when they think about Dungeons and Dragons. So there he is, that little guy, right? Who became that guy, Tom Wam, in the AD&D Monster Manual, and then other people take a turn at drawing out this crazy creature known as the Beholder. So the Beholder is my number 1 creature. It shows up in Greyhawk, along with all these other good new monsters that they had created, and it too has its description change a little bit over time. So the Beholder. These monsters are also known as spheres of many eyes, or as eye tyrants. They're right there from the beginning. The body of the creature is a great globe 3 feet across. The top are 10 eye stalks, and in the center of the spherical body is the great 11th eye. The body can take 40 points of damage, each eye stalk 10 points of damage, central eye can take 20 points of damage, body armor class 0, eye stalk armor class 2, eyes 7, although I'm not really sure since we don't have called shots, but each eye functions in a different manner. 1 to 4 can function at any given time. And then they list out the abilities, right? Eye 1, Charm Person, Charm Monster, Sleep, Telekinesis, Flesh to Stone, Disintegrate, Fear, Slow, Serious Wounds, Death Ray, and Anti-Magic Ray. In addition, obviously, they don't have any legs or arms. Beholders can levitate themselves. They float slowly about. They are avaricious, neutral in nature, but tend to be a little chaotic. They tend to be a little chaotic, in my view, tend to be a little bit evil. But anyway, that's just my opinion. The Beholder is another monster that makes its appearance here in the original rules, and then is not in the Holmes Basic or the or Moldvay, and then of course shows up in the AD&D book. And again, I think the imagination and imagery of the Beholder has just become a much more central and part of the Dungeons and Dragons mythos, I think. In first edition, we obviously knew what Beholders were, but we didn't really consider them, I don't think, a central figure, but I think they've just really captured the imagination of D&D players. There's some great art, and there's a series of books that came out in maybe second or third edition that talked about the Eye Tyrants and the Beholders, and they've just become a really, really popular part of the game. So that's the end of my look at these originally created monsters. I just think the creativity that's involved in Dungeons and Dragons is one of my favorite parts of the game, and the creating of new monsters is something we've all done right from the very beginning. Even Gary Gygax, right, started with some monsters from myth and legend and novels, like Tolkien, etc. And from there, pretty quickly, you said, you know what, we need some new monsters. They've been part of Strategic Review, part of Dragon Magazine, White Dwarf, and everybody's homebrewed campaign as well. So it's really one of my favorite things about the game. I always love to read about new monsters. I do these fanzine videos, and as you guys who watch that would know, I always say you can never have too many monsters. They're not all great, but you always get creative ideas that you can use in your own campaign. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video where we looked at what I think are 10 of the best original monsters created for the game of Dungeons & Dragons. Hope you're enjoying my channel. I hope you're subscribed. If you have friends who like my content, please send them my way, and hopefully they will subscribe as well. Have a great rest of your day, and until next time, my friends, keep rolling 20s.